Special interview with a random Kings fan. That's next here on this edition of Locked On LA Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Kings. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, Kings fans, welcome to Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On LA Kings your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. We'd love for you to leave us a positive comment on Apple Podcasts if you're a fan of the show. And we're on YouTube. Please like and subscribe if you're enjoying this content. I'm Eddie Garcia, your host of Locked On LA Kings. I've worked in sports media for the past 30 years, 20 plus years at the Fox Sports Radio Network. I'm also co-host of the Puck Podcast, a weekly NHL review show that's been putting out content for the last 18 years. And a passionate LA Kings fan for over 30 years. Now through September the 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get 3 weeks of a free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Well, I hope you think that this show has done a pretty good job with fan interaction. We have our Friday fan feedback shows, but I had hoped to have more Kings fan interviews. We've had a couple of random Kings fans interviews, but not many. As a matter of fact, I think there's been two. We had Steve, West Coast Hockey Bias on Twitter, and then we had Steven, the Kings fan in Ireland, and I think that's it. I apologize if I missed somebody else, but I have asked several opinionated Kings fans to come on the show who I've come across on social media, and most of them have said thanks, but no thanks, which is totally fine. But I'm glad to finally get another random Kings fan on the show. And with that, we're going to welcome in Gary Lampert. And he's not only going to tell us a little bit about himself, but also a little bit about something he's doing as a Kings fan, maybe a passion project for him. By the way, you can follow him on Twitter at GaryOke56, GaryOke 56. And you can check out his Substack about the LA Kings at kingsthoughts.substack.com. More on that in a moment. But first, Gary, thank you for doing this. Great to have you on. How you doing?
Eddie, I've had a lot of great moments in my life. Marriage to my wife, birth of a few kids. Mm-hmm. This is tops. No question. Oh, Thanks for letting me be the random Kings fan.
Well, you know how to be a good guest, I can tell right away. So the audience and myself are going to learn a little bit about you together. I know we do share something in common. The opening page, other than being a Kings fan, the opening page of your Kings Thought Substack says that you played beer league hockey in Culver City, among other places, and I started my illustrious beer league career in Culver City. May it rest in peace.
Blessed memory.
Yes, going up and down stairs in skates is always a good idea. But as you know, well, as you don't know, we've scheduled this interview. You're actually on the East Coast. So let me ask you first off, where are you? And obviously you're a former Southern California resident. What brought you out to the East Coast?
Yeah, I grew up in LA, born and raised West LA, not far from Culver City, Mar Vista, if you're familiar with microgeography of LA. What brought me to the East Coast is I graduated college and got work out here. So I'm in New Jersey, kind of in the New York City suburbs. I lived in New York City for 10 years. So I haven't, every time I make a trip back to LA to visit the folks, I usually try to catch a Kings game if it's that time of year. But haven't been living out there in, I don't know, 16, 17 years, something like that. One small correction though. I was a youth hockey player at the Culver City Ice Rink where I play for the Marina City Sharks. Now my beer league exploits are out here in Jersey.
Very nice. How's that scene?
It's good. I do the, I don't know if you've heard of it. There's Hockey North America. It's this big program. They make it more official. They keep stats and stuff. But I used to do stuff over there. When I was a kid, I was a bad, fat, out of shape player, and I still am. But occasionally people say I make a positive impact. So my teammates seem to appreciate me.
Well, I did not grow up playing the game, unfortunately. So that's very cool that you've got that. But I'm glad we're still brothers in beer league hockey. That's very cool. So I assume kind of the obvious how you became a Kings fan. You just kind of like, you may or may not know my story. When Gretzky came to LA, it piqued my interest. I wasn't a hockey fan, had no connection to the game at all. Started watching it, and then the year they went to the Stanley Cup final, it just sold me on how amazing this sport is, and I just grew and grew and grew every year to where it's, my favorite sport now, and the Kings are my favorite team. So was it just a natural, you played hockey as a kid and that kind of led to you being a Kings fan?
Not really. I mean, I grew up in the '90s. I was born in '89. But I pretty much missed Gretzky. I remember my older sister going to a few games at the Forum with friends, but I never made it out there. I think what got me interested was the Mighty Ducks movies, and I remember I went to a kid's birthday party at Culver City Ice Rink, and after the public session, one of the youth hockey teams, the Marina City Sharks, went out there on the ice, and I just thought it was so cool. And it was like the movies. I do have a confession that in a deep, dark part of my past, in the '90s, I was actually a Ducks fan at first. Korea was my favorite player. Number 9 was my favorite jersey. And that continued until it was like a gradual transition. I had a friend who gave me he would go to Kings game. He gave me the Luke Robitaille 500th goal poster, which was in my room. And then I played on a terrible team where we got trounced 12-0 by the Junior Ducks. And this was the '99-2000 season. And the Kings were on the up. So then I made the switch. Thought Ducks are stupid. That's a Disney team. So made the switch.
There you go.
Stuck with it ever since.
Well, thankfully you did see the light at some point. And I have to grudgingly admit that those Mighty Ducks movies, as much as I don't like them, did play their role in helping a lot of kids get interested in hockey and playing hockey. So that, I have to give them their credit where their credit is due. I did see on your Substack that Rob Blake is, I believe, your favorite all-time King, which we'll certainly be talking about him a little bit more. But any favorite Kings memories or anything you want to share?
Yeah, it's funny. So first of all, I grew up without cable, so it made what I watched much more limited. In fact, the Ducks were much more accessible than the Kings because they were on KCAL a good number of times. The Kings, it would be basically the nationally broadcasted games, and for most people, it's Bob Miller. It's the voice of the Kings. For me, it's Nick Nixon. I listened on the radio when I could. But best memory, even just because I was a kid and you're more emotionally attached to the time, is still that '01 playoff run with the frenzy at Figueroa. I stayed up late listening to it on the radio, and then we clinched the series. We put a scare in Colorado, so nothing tops that for me. The cup runs were special. There's no question, but just the time and place. I really have a fondness for those late '90s, early 2000s teams, even though Blake left.
Yeah. So on the opening of your King's Thoughts Substack, it says, quote, hopefully regular, but at least sporadic thoughts and analysis related to the LA Kings and the NHL. So quickly, if you could just educate me on what a Substack is compared to a blog. And do you have any kind of background in writing, or what made you want to start to do this?
So as far as I know, Substack is just a nice brand for a blog, since they've sort of taken over that space. And most people aren't using other sites the same way that they once did. But you can think of it like a blog. People can write however they want on there. People use all sorts of other forms. I haven't seen it that much for hockey. There's a few national writers, particularly in the so-called analytics community, that like publishing on Substack. My background is not in writing, except, occasionally I have to do some writing for work. But as I've gotten older, and this would have shocked me when I was younger, I've sort of discovered I enjoy writing. And in particular, what I'm trying to do, we'll see how long I can keep this up. There's a certain kind of in-depth analysis that I felt like the conventional kind of column struggles to fit in, where you take a subject and you really flesh it out, like how deep can you go into this, and we can get into what I've written so far. It hasn't been all that much, but and I felt like this is a space where I can make a contribution. Maybe a few people read me and I'll change some minds, and if not, I'll enjoy it. So went at it, and we'll see how long I keep it up.
And if you don't mind, do you mind telling us what you do for a living?
Banking.
Okay.
Credit and banking.
All right. Very good. Well, now that we know a little bit about you and your Kings story, definitely want to get into those Kings thoughts. We will do that next here on Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Well, we have something a little different for you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. With a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market NFL game. All you need is a Google account, a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. And of course, FanDuel is always there for you to bet on your favorite sports. Major League Baseball winding down. You got college football getting into full swing. And of course, the NFL season is underway. Join FanDuel, browse the latest betting odds of your favorite sports and teams on the Sportsbook app, and get in on the action. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to download America's #1 sportsbook. All right, we continue with Random Kings fan Gary Lampert, and we're going to get into his Kings Thoughts Substack, which you can check out at kingsthoughts.substack.com. So I read your latest post entitled Toxic Environment, and I guess somewhat at your request, because you did tag me in a post on social media. So let's get into that. First off, I will definitely say it's well written and certainly well researched. I like you, I don't really know what to make of social media, right? It's a great way to connect with people like you and me. But clearly, it's also, I think, in large part, just a place where people want to bitch and complain. And I don't know how much of it is a true representation of what, a Kings fan base is, as far as their, dissatisfaction with the Kings and in particular GM Rob Blake. I know you want people to read this, so we're not going to give it all away. But basically, what are your give the gist of the latest Kings Thought post and what you're trying to say in that latest post.
Yeah. And it might not be latest soon, but we'll see. The toxic environment is the opening section. The actual title is A Defense of the Pretty Good Kings. And the basic premise, I start out, there's a joke I heard in the background. Two economists meet in the bar. One asks the other, "How's your wife?" And the other one says, "Compared to what?" That's pretty much the approach to everything, and it's a fairly long and I would hopefully think thorough piece, which is, for all the complaints you see out there, what is your comparison? So I kind of go through step by step, and you go through the history of the franchise, the rest of the league, particularly similarly situated teams throughout the league, by what measure you look at. Is it the playoffs? Is it the regular season? And basically where I come out is the team's doing pretty good, pretty well. I think what a lot of people, there's some statistical stuff we have to correct. So for example, we do only comparison to regulation performance, so you can get a nice comparison to historical teams. But we basically just went through the greatest 3-year stretch of regular season performance in the history of the franchise. Now, it's a franchise that doesn't have that strong of a history, so it's not a perfect defense. But when I see all these comments, and a lot of them are smart people who either insinuate or say, Rob Blake doesn't know what he's doing, or they act like they're tortured by how awful things are. I look at it and I say, gee, if it's that easy to run a franchise, why have they never done it better than this before? Now we can get to the playoffs, where clearly, at least for one stretch, we did have much more success. And it's a complicated subject, and I think there are lots of criticisms that are fair, particularly the Dubois trade, which I don't dwell on too much, except to say that by itself is a fireable offense. It's very damaging. And then you look at the rest of the league. I think people forget that just a few years ago, this was an awful team. We went through a 3-year stretch there where we had the 4th worst record in the league from 2019 to 2021. If you look at the teams, the bottom half of the league during that time period, almost none of them have made the playoffs at all. Only 2 of them have made 3 playoff trips, and they were teams that already had a nice lineup. So that's the Rangers and the Oilers. And it's not all just like tankers, like the Ducks and the Sharks. And we could debate whether they even intentionally were tanking the whole time. I remember 21-22, they were in the race for that Pacific Division title. There are teams that are making big moves, trying to get into the playoffs. Ottawa's making big moves. Columbus, now it's sad memory, but they made big moves as well. And none of them are succeeding like the Kings. So yeah, I think that's pretty much what I'd stress, that relative to reasonable expectations, the team's done pretty well so far. So it's all about how you make your expectations.
I definitely agree with that, and I agree that making the playoffs 3 years in a row is pretty good. But I think the question is, what's the standard, or what should be the standard? And especially in a market like LA, you've got the Dodgers spending ungodly amounts of money to try and win a championship. The Lakers obviously have had their past. Currently they do have one of the greatest players on the planet, LeBron James. They won a bubble title. If you want to, for what you want to give that. The Rams spent a lot of money, made a lot of trades, F them picks, right, to win a Super Bowl. So shouldn't we as Kings fans expect a higher standard for what we want the Kings to be, rather than to just say, well, the Kings are pretty good?
Well, everyone's entitled to, expect whatever they want to expect. The fact is, if it was so easy to, be the best team in the league, they would have done it already, or other teams would do it. It's just not that easy to create that kind of turnaround. Particularly when, so like New Jersey, where I am, they had 2 number 1 overall picks, and lots of other high draft picks, and they just missed the playoffs. Now injuries are a part of it, but for Edmonton, they've had a long stretch here where they finally made it to the final. They almost made it there. They had 4 straight number 1 picks, and they had, I think, 2 other top 5 picks. So, a lot of it's the hand you're dealt, and, hockey to some extent is not like basketball, but, it's funny because people complain about Rob Blake. And again, as I say, the Dubois trade was a fireable offense, but people complain about him for different things. So some people complain that he's basically ruined the future of the franchise by not being patient with prospects. And now you're making the counter case, which is the problem is we should demand higher or demand more from the franchise. So, if by the analogy with the Lakers, we should go big game hunting and see what we can get, and get what kind of free agents. I think on the fundamentals of what he did, without getting into each and every decision, I think he basically handled this right. So you had 2 aging stars who it turned out still had a lot left in Kopitar and Doughty. You had some young players that were on the up and up, like Kempe. You take a few years, you load up the pool, you see what you can get. Don't stay committed to any particular prospect. So if it turns out that Trevor Moore is better than Tyler Madden or Elias Anderson, go with Trevor Moore. And then see what you can get. Okay, let's trade some prospects, get Kevin Fiala. Okay, let's trade some prospects, get Pierre-Luc Dubois. Whoops. So it's a complicated story. And I guess where I was getting a little fed up is I felt like there was a lot of negativity, and I felt like a lot of writers are just kind of feeding into it. They can sense that the audience wants more bashing, and I enjoyed last season. It was frustrating in a lot of ways, but some of my favorite players like Kopitar and Doughty, they're having some of the best years of their career, and an age, long past where you would expect them to be competitive. So, I think it's at least worthwhile to take a few moments to note, oh, that was pretty good. You're not going to win the Stanley Cup every year. And as I spent a lot of time noting, you're not going to get past the first round every year. These streaks across the NHL are growing where teams are not getting past the first round. We have 32 teams now and only 16 playoff spots. It's going to get more and more rare.
Well, you quoted me in your article as saying that 3 straight first-round exits would spell doom for a GM, and I did enjoy your Monty Python reference. But when you look at, and you can, I definitely try not to play into that negativity. I just try to be honest. I had an emailer a couple weeks ago who was complaining I was too negative, and I listened to him, but I thought in the end, I'm just being honest. If that means it sounds like I'm being negative, I'm not trying to be. I'm not certainly a hot take artist. I do work in that world of sports talk radio, and it's not something that appeals to me. So I'm trying not to be too negative, but I want to be honest as well. So I'm trying to balance that out. But I think one thing about this past season, and you talk about 3 playoff appearances and 3 first-round exits, all to the same team. When we heard Rob Blake and Luc Robitaille preaching to us about how it had to be better, we had to have a different result. And then when it doesn't happen, I don't think it's unreasonable to ask for accountability for that. And Rob Blake is still there. I'm going to ask you about what you think his future is. But even though it's been pretty good, you're of the opinion that Rob Blake definitely should. I know you said the fireable offense potentially with the Pierre-Luc Dubois, but you're of the opinion for now, because of the 3 playoff appearances, that we should be, I don't know, a little bit more understanding with Rob Blake, and that he's earned the fact that he can have another year on the job running the team.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard because if you look across the NHL, and I didn't realize this until again, everyone's aware of all the problems with their own franchise, and they have no idea what's going on with the rest of the NHL. Initially I was a little defensive of it, and then I look around and you realize, oh, NHL GMs get canned all the time. I mean, they're a dime a dozen. I mean, to me,
and coaches.
And coaches too, right?
Yeah.
So to me, it's kind of like a ritualistic sacrifice. Things are frustrating, so let's get rid of the GM. To be honest, I don't think Rob Blake has any special powers that he's bringing to the team, or if he were gone and somewhere else were here, the team would go down the tube. I wasn't a big believer in Lombardi's genius, though I think he did some good things. I think he made some big mistakes too. So I don't know. I think it would placate the fan base a bit. Accountability, I don't know. It's because you're right. So, for example, one of the things I stress is that there's almost too much focus on playoffs here, not enough on how does the team look in general. But playoffs can be so random. Like I was just listening the other day, Kings of the Podcast, John Hoven, Dennis Burstie's podcast, and they're making their predictions for the season. They say, oh, we think the team will have a worse record. Is this true or false? Will they have a better or worse record? And they say, we'll have a worse record. Will they get past the first round? I think so. I thought to myself, why would you think that? I mean, so these past 3 years, they've been the lower seed. They've been the underdog. Why is it surprising that they're losing in the first round? You would expect them to lose in the first round. So I thought the team before this year was really good. I thought towards the end of the season, that 22-23 team was very strong, very solidly built, a lot of depth. And, it's just hard to win the playoffs. So when you say, should they be accountable? I just feel like our expectations should be relative to what would you expect for an above average GM, and so far I'd say they've met them. On the other hand, it's not the end of the world if they get rid of them. I feel like most GMs do basically the same thing. I don't think it's rocket scientists. You might be listening to rocket scientists, but you yourself are just making reasonable judgments.
Well, I think we do agree on some things. I do think our prospect pool, and I think the drafting has been pretty good. I think Mark Yannetti does a good job. I certainly don't blame Rob Blake for the spirit of the Pierre-Luc Dubois trade. I've always wanted my GMs to be aggressive, and if they feel like there's a chance to, add a player that could make a big difference, and they want to go out and do that, I'm behind that. Although that particular trade I wasn't a huge fan of, but I certainly don't think Rob Blake is incompetent. I certainly don't think there's things he's done that have been good. There's things he's done that haven't been so good, with like every other general manager in the NHL as well. Okay, I do want to get into this upcoming season and what you think about what we're gonna see this year. We'll do that next year on Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. Do want to let you know that those of us that live in LA, very lucky to have so many opportunities to see live sports for sure. But it's not just about sports. We've got other things, events, concerts, and no matter what you enjoy, you need to do what I do, and that is use Gametime for all your ticket needs. Gametime has a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets to your favorite live events even easier. Gametime filters out all the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste your time searching through thousands of tickets. You can get Dodger tickets for less than $40, LAFC tickets less than $25. Just download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime. All right, we're wrapping it up with Gary Lampert, Kings fan and the man behind the Kings Thoughts Substack. So let's talk about this upcoming season, Gary. I'm very intrigued to see how it goes. Jim Hiller is now going to lead the team on a full-time basis. Thought he did a decent job under the circumstances as interim coach last year. Any thoughts on Jim Hiller as the head coach of the LA Kings?
I think I'm optimistic. I think that towards the second half of last season, the team kind of, and it's something I'm trying to write about, they were bleeding so much in January that they were just doing anything to just, I don't know, mix metaphors to plug up the holes or something, that they became a very rigid defensive team. And I think ultimately by the time they reached the playoffs, they were weaker for it. But, I was impressed with the turnaround they had on the power play. He seems like a reasonable guy. I like that he seems to recognize that the team does some things well. It's the third best defense in the league right now, or this past season. So yeah, I'm optimistic, but you don't know until you see it. And then even when you see it, you don't even know if it's the coach.
Well, we've had some additions, no big splashes, but Warren Fogle, Tanner Jeannot, Joel Edmondson. There's this idea that the Kings needed to get bigger and more physical, and the Kings have tried to do that. Are you in line with that philosophy, that was something the Kings needed to do, and do you think that they've addressed that?
I think it can't hurt to get a little more physical. I don't think it's the big issue for the franchise. I think the big thing for them right now is high-end talent. I mean, you could say this across the season, but it becomes particularly salient when you're playing Edmonton. They're throwing out McDavid and Draisaitl, and Kings have good players, and I think people underestimated that top line the Kings had last year. If you look at the numbers of Kopitar, Byfield, and Kempe, they really were one of the strongest lines in the league. But in terms of raw firepower, are other teams quaking over what the Kings can send out there? It's that they just can't compete at this point. We'll see what happens as Byfield matures, or maybe someone else blossoms. But toughness is a good thing. I like toughness, so I'm on board. I think a lot of it's a step down from Arvidsson, but he wasn't playing for a lot of last year. So I guess on net, it could be an improvement. I'm open-minded about it. The Edmondson thing, I'm very curious about, because there's a lot of hostility to him, and I'm not sure how many these people have watched him. I certainly haven't watched him much. So we'll see. I don't know. Maybe he's bad, but I just don't know.
Darcy Kemper comes over in the Pierre-Luc Dubois trade. Won a few years ago, but hasn't looked great in Washington since. Obviously, the Kings, if they can play good team defense, that would help them out a lot. How are you feeling about Darcy Kemper as the 1A goalie for the Kings?
I can't say I'm super confident, but you hope for the best. It's possible we're getting spoiled a little around here. We brought in Cam Talbot last year, and we say, oh, well, he turned it around, so Talbot will turn around. That team I really liked, the 22-23 Kings, they were almost done in by goaltending, right? Quick and Peterson really couldn't keep the puck out of the net, even if you looked at the team and most of the metrics looked fine. So I don't know. From all I read, he wasn't that good in Washington last year. He didn't have great numbers, but who knows? Talbot turned it around. So it was worth the move. We'll see what happens. So I can't say I'm too optimistic, but there's reasons for optimism.
And some of the younger players that are going to get a chance apparently this season, anybody you're particularly excited about seeing?
Well, everyone's excited about Clark. I think what a lot of people underestimate this year is there's so many young guys coming in who either had a high pedigree at one point or have been very impressive in the minors, or like Laferriere, as a very young player, played a full season. The chance that one of them will really pop in a way we're not anticipating is pretty good. Like, in the same way Velarde out of nowhere a couple of years back, you look at him and you're like, oh, that's kind of a high-end NHL player. I think there's a good chance of that happening with one of them. I would keep my eye out on Turcotte and Fagemo. One thing I don't think people notice with Fagemo, they just sort of think he was a high goal scorer in the AHL. You look at his numbers, for his age, that was the highest goal scoring season they have on record in the AHL per game. I mean, he had a really strong season. So it doesn't always translate. And I tried to look up, for guys who are like 23 years old, when you score near that rate, how do they typically do in the NHL? And it's kind of tricky, because usually if you're in the AHL at 23 years old, you're not going to be anything. So it's hard to say. The only exception I saw, Verhaeghe from Florida, was not quite on Fagemo's level, but he kind of had a late move over.
Well, Gary, I appreciate your optimism on the Kings, and certainly I'm sharing that as well. Once the season gets started, I'm ready to go, excited about this upcoming season, and very curious really to see how it all plays out. Hopefully, in the end, it'll be another great regular season. We'll see what happens in the playoffs. But thanks for doing this. And if you guys want to follow Gary on social media, on X, Twitter, he's at Gary Oak 56, Gary.
It's supposed to be like karaoke.
Karaoke. There you go.
So karaoke.
Karaoke, Garyoke 56. 56 have any meaning? Was it a number you wore or anything like that?
It was a number I wore, but it's since become obsolete.
Well, we also would encourage you to check out his Substack on the LA Kings, kingsthoughts.substack.com. Gary, thanks for being our random Kings fan. Best of luck with your Kings Thoughts project. I'll be checking it out. And thank you for doing this.
Thanks so much. It's been a blast.
All right. Take care, and we'll talk to you, I'm sure, on social media.
All right.
Thank you. All right. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed that, and hopefully we can get some more random Kings fans throughout the upcoming season. For you everydayers, those of you that listen and watch Locked On Kings every day, of course, coming up on Friday, it is our usual weekly Kings fan feedback show. Any thoughts on anything we've discussed this week, any Kings news, training camp starting, the rookie face-off and all that, send an email, lockedoneddie@gmail.com, EDDIE. And you're always welcome to post your thoughts if you're watching on YouTube in the comments section. We appreciate that. You want to stay connected with the show on social media. We're on X, we're on Twitter, we're on Instagram at Locked On LA Kings. I'm Eddie Garcia. Thank you as always for listening and watching this episode of Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Have a great rest of your day. We will talk to you coming up on Friday. And as always, go Kings, go.